event of the evening. Very rarely, and when I say very rarely, I mean never has this ever happened and never will happen again. Will you get the single most important fight in the history of a gender, being the women, not headlining an event? Now, the timeline of this fight is a little bit tumultuous. They wanted to do it for UFC 228. Nunes was still kind of coming back, nursing. I think it was a hand. Was it a hand or was it an ankle?
I don't know.
She somehow injured something, beating Raquel Pennington into a pulp in May. That delayed it a little bit. And when she said she might be ready to be fully healthy, she said, I want a full camp if I'm training for Cyborg. Don't blame her. And now here we are. When the fight was first announced, I thought it was interesting whenever Karen Bryant, the people at Fox, were like, oh, blah, 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 Cyborg Nunes or UFC 232, but had to make the point to throw in there that this is, they said on the Fox broadcast, this is not the card's main event. And that's when you were like, okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. But still, I mean, we're talking about the most important fight and the most influential as far as molding of legacies at the very top of women's MMA, all coming down into this fight. Just because, like, I don't feel like there are girls in either weight class, obviously not featherweight, that can put a challenge to that title anytime soon. Keith, your thoughts?
No, I totally agree. I mean, they're the two best in their weight class. They're the two probably, I mean, with the exception of maybe Joanna Jędrzejczyk and possibly even Ronda Rousey still. I'm in one of those very small group that still respects Ronda's skills. Yeah, these are probably the two best women fighter. And I really feel like the UFC blew this timing. I understand why it's the co-main event. It was probably a little bit of a safety valve, being that you can't trust John Jones. Obviously, this week is even further proof. I feel it's just that it was rushed. I feel like this fight should have been planned further. I believe that sometimes I feel like the same way with Cejudo and Dillashaw. I feel that same way with what we had with Shevchenko and Joanna. I feel sometimes they put these super fight type of situations, they kind of rush it. I think it would have been better to let these two women bicker further, get more wins in the division, defend the titles, kind of have longer runs, and then finally set this fight up. I think it's a shame to be on a co-main event. I believe both of them are worthy to be. I mean, you got two champions, two dominant champions. I think they should. And I think this would have been a perfect card if you decided to do it just 1 month later. I think this would have been a perfect one to kick off the ESPN deal. I mean, what a change that would be. I mean, you start when the UFC first got on Fox and women weren't even in the UFC to the first time they go on ESPN and you're headlining with two great females on ESPN. I thought that would have been the best move.
Right. No, totally. I'm with you. I think that if I put on my promoter hat, that potentially what made the most sense, and I remember that being rumored earlier in the year, was before Nunes Pennington was on the table. Because let's be honest. I mean, I get it. Amanda Nunes is a champion. She's got to defend her belt. There are certain requirements. Amanda Nunes versus Raquel Pennington is the weakest main event on any UFC card, pay-per-view, or fight night this year, hands down. Is there a weaker main event other than that?
There was a weaker fight night. I don't remember what.
Anders a little bit more appealing than.
What'd you say?
Santos versus Anders to me is even a little bit more appealing.
Was Machida in Anders this year? That was this year, right?
Yeah, Machida Anders was this year. That one was really
that was probably a one that to me that was probably less appealing, but it ended up being fantastic. Would have been the Yaya Rodriguez, Chan Sung Jung. I don't know if that. I don't know if that's it. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about two guys that were at the bottom of the top 10 in the rankings. If you're talking about worldwide rankings, you got two probably in the bottom of the top 15, maybe not. Yeah, Rodriguez might not even been in our top 15 rankings at the time. So,
whenever I first saw that fight was made, that was one of those fights where I was like, oh boy, just stylistically.
Well, I think rankings matter, and I think they should matter more. For example, you have Megan Anderson and Kat Zingano fighting on this card, and it's buried. And you have Carlos Condit and Michael Chiesa. And to me, Kat Zingano and Megan Anderson means a lot more in the title picture right now than Carlos Condit and Michael Chiesa. But one is buried, and the other one's third from the top. I mean, you have that with flyweight title fight. I mean, you have that with flyweight matchups every single big card. Big card. I mean,
it's definitely
so true. Maybe I'm not necessarily looking at it from a stylistic matchup, as I'm looking at more as a rankings and what it means to the division. And but I get the overall sentiment. It is a shame to have the fact that Nunes versus Pennington headline a pay-per-view and Nunes versus Cyborg is not.
Right. But, due to the circumstances of one John Jones being on the card, it's understandable. And I want to.
But the problem is they get overshadowed now. They get two of the best women fighting for probably to be the greatest women fighter ever, and they're overshadowed by John Jones. On SportsCenter the next day, yeah, they are. I mean, SportsCenter the next day, what are they going to be talking about? They're not going to be talking about Nunes Cyborg. They're going to be talking about what happened in the Jones-Gustafsson fight.
Right. No, I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. I think that if we're sitting around the proverbial still in the holiday season MMA fan Christmas tree, I think we could, kind of look the other way on being a little bit spoiled as fans in this particular situation. However, I definitely think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. I think that this fight could have definitely made a lot of sense to headline that exact Rio card that we're talking about. And I'm glad that you touched on fights that are important for the current state of the division. We're talking about a division right now that doesn't really exist. And if Kat Zingano dominates Megan Anderson, which I personally, in my personal opinion, think Megan Anderson's a good fighter. However, stylistically, I think there's a great chance this fight looks a whole lot like the home one did.
Sure.
Especially with how Kat Zingano was so takedown reliant against Marion Renault in July. More takedown reliant than she ever has been in the UFC. You would think that if one were smart, you would tell Kat to repeat the same strategy. However, all of that being said, if Kat Zingano turns away the only true 145er on the roster, point where she's 0-2, and Cyborg takes care of Nunes easily, I mean, what else is there? You have a girl, obviously, who's not ready, but a girl coming up in Invicta, just crowned Invicta featherweight champion, Felicia Spencer, who I think any day now could get called up to the UFC, and I wouldn't bat an eye. But she's not ready for a Cyborg fight. I don't even think Kat Zingano is really in the space of being ready for that type of a challenge.
No, so that's the situation. Going back to what I was talking about before, that this fight is married because Amanda Nunes is. If this is the first time since Cyborg has been in the UFC, probably the first time since maybe Marlos Kunin fight where you actually question if Cyborg could win, and obviously Cyborg is still the fairly decent sized favorite, but there's people who are backing him in it. No one backed Tanya Evinger. Nobody backed, for the most part, no one backed Holly Holm. Nobody backed Yana Kunitskaya, and go on and on and on and on. This is the first time Cyborg has faced a true test. And that's why I think it's a shame. That's why I think it's like, wow, man, like we finally get to really understand how good Cyborg is or how good she isn't. Right. And it's not even headlining. It's co-main, and obviously it's a big one. So it's not like this is not underneath Whitaker versus Gastelum. It's not underneath it's a smaller fight like that. I mean, this is a major one with Jones and Gustafsson. I feel like it's a shame because of how excited I am for this fight, and we should be excited. They should be getting in the top spot. They should have their faces should be on the big billboards in Vegas and New York City and different places, and it's not, and it's a shame.
Wait, Keith, do you hear that? Keith, you betrayed me.
Oh God, I love her. I love her. I almost mentioned her, except for that pretty much everyone. It's funny when you said the biggest fight. It's funny that when you said the biggest fight in women's history, I almost said I don't know if it was. I don't know. Cyborg and Gina Carano probably had more press into it and more recognition.
Realm too, you know, like Cyborg and Carano was a lot bigger than people realize, especially people who have kind of acclimated themselves into MMA fandom, but haven't done their homework or, you know, taken a look at the history book.
Sure. Yeah. Evan always calls Ronda Rousey the first MMA star. It wasn't. It was first MMA women's. Oh, sorry, I'm saying this wrong. First women's MMA star. And no, Gina Carano was. She really was. Gina Carano did just as much for the sport of MMA than Gina Carano did. I'm sorry, than Ronda Rousey did.
And she just texted you right now too.
Yeah, I wish. But the difference between what we were talking about between the Amanda Nunes and the Cyborg fight, if you go back and you saw Cris Cyborg, you knew Cris Cyborg was going to beat Gina Carano.
100%.
This is not the case now. While I expect most people to pick Cyborg, when you submit that pick, you're not as confident as you have been in the past.
Of course not.
Not nearly, not even close.
Especially with the recent history that Cyborg's had, you know. In particular, the Yana Kunitskaya, you know, human sacrifice kind of thing.
Sure.
And Yana Kunitskaya has a bright future at 135, but it is just short notice, no training camps. Cyborg, I mean, there were 0 pillars of success set up for her in that matchup. And then before that, I mean, Holly, I guess, but what is the thinking about that brings me to this question. What if you were in a video game and you entered create your fighter mode? How do you build the prototype in women's MMA? Size, attributes. What is the prototype blueprint to beat Cyborg?
Man, I wish I knew. If I was, I'd be coaching. I mean, I don't know. She is so good. She obviously is stronger than everybody. One thing that she does, everyone always talks about her power. She is fast and she is accurate. She doesn't get enough credit for how accurate she is, and her ground game is tremendous. Though she never shows it. I mean, this is a girl who competed in Abu Dhabi. Her ground and pound is vicious. She has a thing about her that not many women have. And I don't mean this to sound sexist, but it might come off that way. She has a killer instinct.
Yeah.
Aspen Ladd has a killer instinct.
I think Joanna Jacek.
Molly McCann, not that she's that great, but she has one. You got to have this where you take it almost personal. When you go in the cage, it's personal.
Do you think that Joanna Jacek has been missing that killer instinct in her last few fights? Because that's a good thing to kind of point. Joanna Jacek on that title run, if you're looking at pointing out what is a killer instinct in women's MMA, when she was the Jessica Penne fight, that was a killer instinct.
The Kala Esparza, I thought, was a really good one.
Oh, dude, yes.
Where she went to punish them. It's almost. I talked to Aspen Ladd once, and she described it, and she has this she's the nicest girl. She has a super sweet voice, super kind of a little high pitched, almost little teenage girl. Right. But when she gets in the cage, her face changes, and I said, "What are you thinking?" And she's like, "This person wants to take my livelihood," and it becomes personal. It's never personal until she gets in the cage. Now it's personal. Okay. And I feel Cyborg, is the nicest lady outside. You see the charity event she does. You always hear these wonderful things she's doing. But she is a fighter through and through. She doesn't do this because she's good at it. She does it because she's a fighter. She was made to do this.
Yeah, man, I agree with you 100%.
And yeah, and I think Amanda Nunes has it a little bit, not to the extent that Cyborg does.
No, definitely. I think Amanda Nunes has kind of demonstrated that killer instinct in the past. Like the Ronda fight, I think everything that had happened and had built up, and all of the kind of impartial. What are the words I'm looking for? It was a little bit impartial on the UFC's part to allow what kind of went on behind the scenes promotionally and kind of business wise with how they let kind of Ronda like wave around, do whatever.
Special treatment.
And Amanda Nunes just came out in that one, and obviously the rest was history that we all know.